I didn't see it coming. Betrayal, they say, often comes from the places you least expect. For me, it was Daniel, my best friend, or at least, the man I once considered my brother. The man I trusted with my secrets, my victories, and yes, my heartbreaks. The man who stood beside me through college exams, late-night ramen runs, and endless conversations about how we'd conquer the world together. And Amanda, my fiancée, my world. She was the axis on which my dreams revolved. Beautiful, ambitious, and charming in ways that left me utterly defenseless. For years, I thought I had it all. A successful career in its infancy, a future with Amanda, and a best friend who was practically family. But it all crumbled one cold evening when Amanda confessed. Her voice was shaky, her words biting through the silence like shattered glass. "It's Daniel. I think I love him." My first reaction wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Surely, I misheard. My mind scrambled to piece together the words she'd just said, but they clashed with everything I knew about Daniel, about us. How could he? How could they? I wanted to confront him immediately, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shame. No, it was pride. I refused to give him the satisfaction of knowing how deeply he'd cut me. Amanda's words kept looping in my head. "We didn't mean for it to happen." What an insult. Like that absolved them of the deceit. The days that followed were a haze of heartbreak and fury. I ended things with Amanda. I walked away without looking back, even as she cried, even as she begged for my understanding. Daniel didn't bother reaching out. Maybe he thought I wouldn't dare face him. He was right, at least then. I buried myself in work. If love couldn't be trusted, at least my ambition could. Late nights at the office, weekends spent networking, pitching ideas, and learning the intricacies of my trade. It was the distraction I needed. Pain, I discovered, is a potent fuel. I channeled every ounce of heartbreak into building myself up. If Daniel thought he'd broken me, he was wrong. And Amanda? She didn't deserve the space she occupied in my heart. But the betrayal left scars. The end of my friendship with Daniel wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the death of a brotherhood, a bond forged over years of loyalty and shared dreams. It was knowing that someone I once trusted with my life had twisted the knife, smiling all the while. Did I miss him? On some level, yes. It's strange to admit, but I missed the man I thought Daniel was, the version of him that stood by me, not the one who stood over me, grinning as he took what was mine. Resentment became my silent companion. Every business milestone I achieved, every dollar I earned, was a step further away from the version of myself they had betrayed. They couldn't take this from me. Over time, I stopped keeping tabs on them. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers of their life together. A wedding in the Maldives, a lavish home in the suburbs. But I refused to engage. Their existence was irrelevant to mine. My focus was on building something bigger than their betrayal, something they could never take away. Still, late at night, when the world quieted, I couldn't help but wonder, were they happy? Did Amanda ever think about me, about the life we were supposed to have? Did Daniel feel any guilt? I tried not to dwell on these thoughts, but they crept in anyway, haunting the spaces between my triumphs. It's funny how betrayal shapes you. I learned to carry it, not as a burden, but as a reminder of who I am and who I never want to be. Daniel and Amanda's choices didn't just shatter our bond. They forged a fire in me that would burn brighter than they could ever imagine. That chapter of my life was over, but the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. A decade can feel like a lifetime when you live with the remnants of betrayal clinging to your memory. 10 years ago, Daniel and Amanda had shattered my world, and I was left to pick up the pieces. Back then, I didn't know what I was building, only that I refused to let their treachery define me. Today, I see the outcome of those years. A man who didn't just survive but thrived. A man they wouldn't even recognize. Success didn't come overnight. It was a relentless grind. In the early days, I worked out of a cramped office barely bigger than a closet. I'd stare at spreadsheets for hours, running on caffeine and pure determination. Every small win fueled me. Signing a new client, securing funding, landing a project, all of it reminded me that my future didn't belong to them. It was mine to shape. By the 5th year, My company had outgrown the tiny office. I moved into a sleek space downtown, the kind with glass walls and panoramic views that screamed success. But it wasn't just about appearances. I'd built something real, something lasting. My company wasn't just profitable, it was respected. Industry leaders knew my name. Invitations to exclusive events and partnerships with household brands became the norm. Yet, for all my professional triumphs, my personal life remained quiet. People often asked why I wasn't married, or even dating. I'd laugh it off with vague responses, "I'm married to my work," or "I haven't found the right person." The truth? Trust didn't come easily anymore. Amanda had been the one person I thought I could trust with everything, and Daniel had been the brother I thought would protect me. Losing them both in one fell swoop left scars deeper than I cared to admit. But I wasn't lonely. I had meaningful friendships, people who'd been by my side through the years. I'd cultivated a network of allies, mentors, colleagues, and friends who genuinely cared. My success wasn't just mine. It was shared with the people who believed in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. And then there were the rumors about Daniel and Amanda. I didn't seek them out, but the world has a way of making sure you hear things you'd rather ignore. Their life sounded perfect on the surface. Mansions, luxury cars, exotic vacations. Daniel had climbed the corporate ladder, and Amanda had become a fixture at high society events. To anyone else, they seemed untouchable. But I knew better. You can't build happiness on the rubble of betrayal. Their life looked golden, but I often wondered how much of it was just for show. I avoided thinking about them. I wasn't bitter anymore, at least, that's what I told myself. But there were moments, fleeting as they were, when their shadows crept into my thoughts. I'd wonder if they ever thought about me, about what they'd done. Did Daniel feel pride when he looked at Amanda, or was there guilt in the quiet moments? Did Amanda compare her life now to the one we might have had? I focused on what I could control, my work, my legacy. The company I'd built wasn't just a business. It was a testament to resilience. I funded scholarships, supported charities, and mentored young entrepreneurs. Giving back reminded me that success isn't just about money or status, it's about impact. It's about leaving the world better than you found it. I rarely allowed myself to dwell on the past, but there were nights when memories resurfaced. The betrayal didn't sting the way it once did, but it left a dull ache, like an old injury that flares up in the cold. I didn't hate Daniel or Amanda anymore. If anything, I pitied them. Their betrayal had driven me to greatness, but what had it brought them? Wealth? Status? Did it feel as hollow as I imagined? As the 10th anniversary of the betrayal approached, I found myself reflecting more than usual, not with sadness or anger, but with a sense of pride. The person I was 10 years ago would barely recognize the man I'd become. Back then, I was a young professional with big dreams and a broken heart. Now, I was a respected entrepreneur with a legacy. 10 years ago, Daniel and Amanda took everything from me, or so I thought. In reality, they gave me the gift of clarity. They taught me who I could trust and, more importantly, who I couldn't. They showed me that resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about what you do with it, and what I'd done with it. I'd built an empire, one that no betrayal could ever touch. It came in the middle of an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. I was at my desk, going through quarterly reports, when my assistant walked in with an envelope in hand. Her expression was curious, almost amused, as she placed it on my desk. "It's from the Summit of Innovators," she said, the slightest hint of excitement in her voice. "A personal invitation." I set my pen down, taking the envelope with measured curiosity. The Summit of Innovators was no ordinary event. It was the kind of exclusive retreat reserved for the best and brightest. CEOs, industry leaders, pioneers of their fields. People whose names held weight in boardrooms around the world. I'd always admired the summit from afar, but this was the first time I'd been invited. A decade ago, I couldn't have dreamed of being included in such elite circles. Now, I was one of them. The invitation was embossed with gold lettering, the kind of touch that screamed prestige. I read through it twice, taking in the details. A week-long retreat at an exclusive resort, access to top-tier networking opportunities, and discussions led by some of the most influential minds in business. It was the kind of event that could open doors to partnerships and opportunities one hadn't yet imagined. But along with the excitement came hesitation. These kinds of gatherings often felt like a performance. People posturing, inflating their successes, and flashing their wealth like peacocks in a mating ritual. I wasn't sure I wanted to subject myself to that. Still, the potential benefits were hard to ignore. "You should go," my assistant said, as if reading my mind. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "I'll think about it." And think about it I did. For the next 2 days, I weighed the pros and cons. Part of me wanted to stay in my bubble, where I was in control, where I didn't have to deal with the pressures of high society. But another part of me, the ambitious part, knew that this was a chance to elevate my work, to forge connections that could take my company to the next level. On the third day, I decided to attend. I instructed my assistant to RSVP on my behalf and began preparing for the retreat. Little did I know, this decision would lead me straight into the storm I'd spent years avoiding. The resort was as luxurious as the invitation had promised. Nestled in the mountains, surrounded by breathtaking views, it was a haven of sophistication and exclusivity. Upon arrival, I was greeted with the kind of meticulous hospitality reserved for the ultra-wealthy. The staff knew my name, my preferences, even how I liked my coffee. It was impressive, if a little unnerving. The first evening was a casual welcome reception, a chance for attendees to mingle and set the tone for the week ahead. I entered the grand hall, scanning the room filled with elegant people in tailored suits and designer dresses. Conversations buzzed around me, a symphony of power and influence. I was mid-conversation with a venture capitalist when I heard a voice behind me, a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years. "Is that?" The voice trailed off, laced with disbelief. I turned slowly, my heart briefly skipping a beat. And there they were, Daniel and Amanda, my past, staring me in the face. They looked almost the same, yet different. Amanda's beauty was still striking, but there was something tired in her eyes. Daniel had aged too, though his self-assured smirk hadn't changed. The surprise on their faces was quickly replaced by something else, unease. They hadn't expected me to be here, to be part of this exclusive circle. And why would they? 10 years ago, they'd written me off, taking what they thought was the best of me and leaving me in the dust. I didn't flinch. I didn't show any reaction beyond a polite nod. "Daniel." "Amanda," I said evenly. "It's been a long time." Daniel recovered first, his smirk returning. "It has. I didn't expect to see you here." I shrugged, my tone casual. Life takes us in unexpected directions. Amanda said nothing, her gaze flitting between me and Daniel. For a moment, the three of us stood in silence, the weight of unspoken history hanging heavy between us. Then, as if on cue, Daniel extended his hand, his smile forced. "Well, it's good to see you," he said. "Let's catch up sometime this week." I shook his hand, my grip firm but not aggressive. "Sure," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. As they walked away, I allowed myself a small, private smile. They didn't know it yet, but this week was going to be far more interesting than they'd anticipated. I didn't avoid them, but I didn't seek them out either. The retreat was too important to let old ghosts derail my focus. For the first 2 days, I buried myself in discussions, workshops, and networking sessions. Every interaction felt like a step further into the elite circles I'd worked so hard to enter. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. It was at a mid-morning panel on innovation in emerging markets when I heard his voice again. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up from my notes, and there he was, Daniel. His confident smile hadn't faltered, though his eyes seemed to search mine for something. Validation, forgiveness, maybe even intimidation. I wasn't sure, and I didn't care. "Sure," I said casually, gesturing to the seat next to me. He sat down, adjusting his tailored blazer as if the movement itself was a statement of his success. For a moment, neither of us spoke, both watching the panelists discuss strategies and innovations. But I could feel his gaze, the weight of his curiosity. He wasn't here to listen to the panel. He was here for me. Finally, during a lull in the discussion, he leaned over. "You've done well for yourself," he said. his tone dripping with a mix of surprise and forced camaraderie. I glanced at him, offering a small smile. I have. And you? Oh, you know, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Life's been good. Amanda and I are doing great. She's here too, by the way. We've been traveling a lot, Europe, Asia, the works. She's kept busy with her charity work. And me, well, he paused, flashing that smug smile. Corporate life has its perks. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Sounds like you've built a nice life. He leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the opportunity to flaunt. We have. Honestly, it's everything we dreamed of back in the day. You remember those conversations we used to have? About living the good life, climbing the ladder? I guess we both made it. I resisted the urge to laugh at his arrogance. I guess we did, I said evenly, turning my attention back to the panel. But Daniel wasn't done. He kept prodding, weaving anecdotes about his success, his travels, and Amanda into the conversation as though he needed to remind me of what he'd taken. It was almost comical. Here we were, surrounded by some of the most brilliant minds in the industry, and all he could focus on was me. At lunch, the reunion took another turn. I'd just finished a conversation with a potential investor when I saw Amanda walking toward me. She looked polished, every detail of her appearance meticulously curated. Her expression was unreadable, though I caught the slight hesitation in her step as she approached. Hello, she said softly when she reached me. It's been a while. It has, I replied, keeping my tone polite but distant. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. You look good. Successful. Thank you. You too. For a moment, we stood there, the silence between us heavy with everything we weren't saying. I could feel her searching for the right words, but whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. Instead, she said, I'm glad you're doing well. Truly. I nodded. I am, and I hope you are too. Her smile faltered, just for a moment, but she quickly recovered. Yes, of course. Life's good. As she walked away, I noticed something I hadn't seen in her before. A crack in her confidence. It wasn't obvious, but it was there, lingering in her posture, her tone. I didn't dwell on it, but it stuck with me. The day continued with more panels and networking, but the encounter with Daniel and Amanda lingered in my mind. Seeing them again, hearing their voices, brought back memories I thought I'd buried. But instead of pain or anger, I felt nothing. Their presence didn't intimidate me. If anything, it solidified how far I'd come. I was no longer the man they'd left behind. I was stronger, wiser, and more accomplished than they could have ever imagined. That evening, at the networking dinner, Daniel cornered me again. This time, Amanda was by his side, her smile more restrained than earlier. Daniel was in his element, laughing loudly, shaking hands, and making sure everyone knew he was somebody. When he finally turned his attention to me, his words were predictably smug. Funny how life works, isn't it? He said, swirling his glass of wine. Back then, we were just two guys with big dreams, and now, well, look at us. Yes, I replied calmly. Look at us. His smile faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. Amanda shifted uncomfortably beside him, avoiding my gaze. Whatever they'd expected from this reunion, I had the distinct feeling it wasn't this. As the night wore on, I realized something important. I didn't need revenge or validation. The simple act of standing here, thriving in the face of their betrayal, was enough. They could boast all they wanted, but I knew the truth. And deep down, I suspected they did too. The next morning brought a renewed sense of focus. I was here for business, not nostalgia. Yet, the universe seemed intent on intertwining my path with Daniel and Amanda's. By now, their attempts to engage me had gone from smug arrogance to calculated persistence. Daniel, in particular, seemed to relish every opportunity to flaunt his so-called perfect life. It was during an informal networking session over coffee that he made his boldest move yet. I was standing near the buffet table, chatting with a fellow entrepreneur, when Daniel walked over, Amanda trailing slightly behind him. He waited for a lull in the conversation before inserting himself. Good morning, he said, his voice dripping with false camaraderie. Mind if I join you? The entrepreneur I'd been speaking with excused himself politely, leaving me alone with Daniel and Amanda. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. Daniel wasted no time launching into his monologue. You know, it's funny running into you here. Amanda and I were just talking about how far we've all come. It's impressive, really, what you've achieved. Still single, though, right? The question hung in the air, its sharp edge cutting through the otherwise pleasant morning atmosphere. Amanda glanced at me, her discomfort evident, but she said nothing. I smiled faintly. That's right. Focused on my work. Daniel leaned back, his smirk widening. Well, I suppose it's easier to focus when you don't have the distractions of family life. Speaking of which, he gestured toward Amanda with a flourish. Look at my wife. Beautiful, rich, and happy. Poor you, still single. His words were meant to sting, to dig into old wounds he thought might still fester. But what he didn't realize was that those wounds had long since healed. I met his gaze, unflinching, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then, I said it, calmly, confidently, and without a hint of hesitation. Meet my wife, too. The words landed like a thunderclap. Daniel's smirk froze, his eyes widening in surprise. Amanda looked equally stunned, her hand faltering on her coffee cup. For a moment, the only sound was the murmur of conversations around us, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred. I glanced at my watch, as if the moment was of no great consequence. Excuse me, I said. My tone as casual as if I were discussing the weather. I need to make a quick call. Leaving them in stunned silence, I walked away, pulling out my phone. The truth? I wasn't making a call. I didn't need to. But the dramatic pause served its purpose. I could feel their eyes on my back as I stepped outside, the tension between them almost palpable. I returned a few minutes later, composed and collected. The room had shifted. Daniel and Amanda were no longer the center of attention. The anticipation of who I might introduce as my wife had rippled through the gathering. The power dynamic had shifted, and I could see it in the way Daniel fidgeted and Amanda avoided eye contact. As I rejoined the room, my wife entered. She was elegance personified, a vision of confidence and poise that drew every gaze in the room. Her entrance was like the opening act of a symphony, each step commanding attention without her needing to say a word. People whispered her name, recognition sparking like wildfire. She wasn't just my wife. She was a force in her own right, a titan in the industry, admired and respected by everyone present. Daniel's expression was priceless. His confident facade crumbled as he stared, his mouth slightly agape. Amanda's reaction was even more telling. Her discomfort turned into something sharper. Envy, perhaps, or regret. Whatever it was, it made her shrink in her designer heels. I walked over to my wife, taking her hand with quiet pride. Everyone, I said, my voice carrying just enough authority to cut through the murmurs. This is my wife. The room erupted in applause, though it wasn't for me. It was for her. Daniel and Amanda clapped too, their motions stiff and robotic, their smiles forced. I could see the wheels turning in Daniel's mind, trying to reconcile the man he thought he'd left behind with the one standing before him now. As the applause died down, I caught Daniel's eye. He looked away first. For the rest of the day, their bravado was noticeably absent. Daniel didn't approach me again, and Amanda avoided even glancing in my direction. The tables had turned, and they both knew it. But I didn't feel triumphant, at least, not in the way they might have expected. This wasn't about revenge or one-upmanship. It was about reminding myself of the man I'd become and the life I'd built, despite their betrayal. That night, as my wife and I shared a quiet dinner, I reflected on the moment. 10 years ago, Daniel and Amanda had taken something from me, something I thought I couldn't live without. But in doing so, they'd given me the fire to build a life far greater than anything they could imagine. And now? Now I was free of them, truly free. The room felt different after she arrived. My wife had a way of commanding attention without demanding it. Her presence was magnetic, a blend of confidence and warmth that made people gravitate toward her. Watching her move through the crowd, greeting people with her signature charm, I felt a quiet pride that was impossible to ignore. She wasn't just admired, she was revered. People whispered her name in awe, some even breaking from their conversations to approach her. To most of them, she was a titan in her field, a leader whose accomplishments had set new benchmarks in the industry. To me, she was the partner who had walked beside me through every challenge, her unwavering belief in me pulling me back from the brink on more than one occasion. Daniel and Amanda were still standing near the buffet table, their earlier bravado now replaced with a mix of confusion and disbelief. I made my way toward them, my wife catching my eye as I approached. Her smile was subtle but knowing. She'd pieced together the situation long before I reached her. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I'd like you to meet someone." Daniel turned, the color draining from his face as my wife stepped forward. Amanda, standing beside him, seemed frozen in place, her eyes darting between the two of us. My wife extended her hand with the same grace she carried in every interaction. "Hello," she said, her tone warm but unmistakably authoritative. "I'm Evelyn." Daniel took her hand mechanically, his smile faltering as he struggled to process the moment. Amanda's attempt at composure was even less convincing. Her polite smile wavered, her eyes betraying a mix of shock and something that looked suspiciously like envy. "Evelyn," Daniel repeated, his voice barely audible. "It's an honor." The irony wasn't lost on me. 10 years ago, he'd stolen what he thought was the pinnacle of my happiness. Now, standing before him was the woman who not only eclipsed everything Amanda had been to me, but also symbolized the life I'd built in the aftermath of their betrayal. I let the moment stretch, watching as Daniel and Amanda grappled with the weight of the realization. It wasn't just Evelyn's presence that stunned them. It was what she represented, her achievements, her influence, her undeniable stature in the industry. She was everything they had pretended to be but weren't. "Evelyn," Amanda finally managed, her voice strained, "I've heard so much about you." Evelyn smiled, the kind of smile that could disarm even the most hardened critic. "I'm sure you have," she said, her tone light but pointed. "It's always nice to put faces to the names." The subtle jab wasn't lost on Amanda, whose cheeks flushed faintly. Daniel, for his part, looked as though he'd been struck by a realization he couldn't escape. As the conversation continued, I noticed the subtle shift in their demeanor. Gone was the arrogance, the smugness they'd carried so effortlessly before. In its place was a nervous energy, a palpable discomfort they couldn't mask. Evelyn, ever the diplomat, maintained her poise, steering the conversation with the kind of effortless grace that only made their discomfort more pronounced. When the conversation finally came to a close, Evelyn excused herself to speak with another attendee, leaving me alone with Daniel and Amanda. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, a collision of past and present that neither of them seemed equipped to navigate. Daniel began, his voice trailing off as he searched for the right word. "Impressive." I smiled faintly, meeting his gaze. "She is." Amanda's expression was harder to read. Her usual composure had cracked, revealing a vulnerability she seemed desperate to hide. "You've done well for yourself," she said finally, though her tone lacked conviction. "I have," I replied simply, "and I'm grateful for every step of the journey that brought me here." The words weren't meant to sting, but I knew they did. They carried a weight that couldn't be ignored, a reminder that the life they thought they destroyed had only grown stronger in their absence. As the day progressed, their attempts to re-engage with me became increasingly awkward. Daniel, who had once relished every opportunity to flaunt his success, now seemed unsure of his footing. Amanda, whose confidence had once been her greatest weapon, looked more like a shadow of the woman I'd once known. By the time the day's events concluded, it was clear that the cracks in their facade were beginning to show. Their carefully constructed image of perfection was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of the truth they couldn't escape. That evening, as Evelyn and I sat together on the terrace overlooking the mountains, I couldn't help but reflect on the day's events. The man I'd been 10 years ago would have sought revenge, would have reveled in their discomfort. But the man I was now felt nothing but clarity, a sense of peace that came from knowing I'd risen above their betrayal. They didn't see that coming, Evelyn said with a quiet laugh, her hand resting lightly on mine. No, I replied, my gaze fixed on the horizon. They didn't. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free. The next day brought a noticeable shift in the air. The energy Daniel and Amanda carried the first 2 days, the smug superiority, the flaunting of their so-called perfect life, was gone, replaced by an awkwardness that made every encounter with them feel like a game of chess where they were already cornered. I didn't seek them out. I didn't need to. The truth of the situation had already sunk in, and I was content to let them sit with it. Still, they found their way back to me, hovering like moths around a flame, unsure if they were drawn to it or afraid of being burned. It was during a networking brunch that Daniel made his next move. I was speaking with a group of entrepreneurs about potential collaborations when I caught sight of him approaching. His smile was polite, almost hesitant, an expression I'd never seen on him before. Daniel was not a man who hesitated. Until now. Excuse me, he said, his voice smoother than it had been the day before. Mind if I steal him for a moment? The group nodded, and I followed Daniel to a quieter corner of the room. Amanda trailed behind him, her usual air of confidence replaced by something far more subdued. For a moment, none of us spoke. Daniel shifted his weight, his hands stuffed awkwardly into his pockets. I just wanted to say, he began, his tone careful, that it's impressive. What you've built, who you've become. I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where he was going with this. Thank you. He nodded, his gaze flickering to Amanda, who was staring at the floor. Look, I know things between us didn't end well. I almost laughed at the understatement. You could say that. He winced, as though the memory physically pained him. We were young, stupid, and I made choices I'm not proud of. The admission hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. Amanda looked up, her expression conflicted, but she said nothing. Daniel continued, his words spilling out in a rush, as though afraid he'd lose the courage to say them if he stopped. I've been thinking about it a lot since yesterday. Seeing you here, seeing what you've accomplished, it's made me realize some things. About myself, about the kind of man I've been. I stayed silent, letting him speak. He took a deep breath, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity I hadn't seen in years. I'm sorry, he said finally, for everything. The words were simple, but they carried a weight I hadn't expected. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger, the resentment that had fueled me for so long. But another part, a quieter, steadier part, recognized the value of letting it go. I appreciate that, I said, my voice measured. But you don't owe me an apology. What's done is done. And honestly, I'm better for it. He nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and regret. Amanda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't think you'd move on like this. You thought I'd fall apart, I finished for her. And maybe I did for a while. But life has a funny way of proving people wrong. She nodded, unable to meet my gaze. Daniel shifted again, his usual bravado replaced by something almost vulnerable. I just wanted to say that, to clear the air. I nodded, offering him a small, genuine smile. Consider it cleared. The conversation ended there, but the impact lingered. For the rest of the day, Daniel and Amanda kept their distance, their earlier attempts to engage replaced by quiet observation. I caught them watching me a few times, their expressions unreadable. It wasn't anger or envy. It was something closer to reflection, perhaps even regret. That evening, Evelyn and I attended a dinner hosted by one of the summit's organizers. It was a formal affair, filled with influential figures exchanging ideas and forging connections. Daniel and Amanda were there, of course, but they didn't approach me. Instead, they kept to themselves, their earlier confidence replaced by a subdued humility. As Evelyn and I mingled, I couldn't help but notice the contrast. Where Daniel and Amanda once seemed untouchable, their cracks were now visible. Meanwhile, Evelyn and I moved through the room with ease, our partnership a testament to what true success and fulfillment looked like. By the end of the evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. Daniel's apology, as unexpected as it was, had given me the final piece I needed to put the past behind me. I didn't hate him anymore. I didn't pity him either. I simply saw him for what he was, a man who'd made mistakes and was now grappling with their consequences. As Evelyn and I left the dinner, I took her hand, grateful for the life we'd built together. The past no longer held power over me. The tables had turned, and I was finally free to move forward. The cracks in Daniel and Amanda's perfect image were no longer subtle. By the third day of the retreat, they were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just their demeanor, the hesitancy in Daniel's once confident stride, or the way Amanda avoided eye contact. It was the little things, the slip-ups that revealed a truth they couldn't hide. It started that morning during a panel discussion on maintaining balance in high-pressure industries. I sat a few rows behind them, close enough to observe without drawing attention. Daniel, who had always prided himself on being a picture of composure, was fidgeting, his attention elsewhere. Amanda leaned in to whisper something to him, but he shook his head, brushing her off. The tension between them was palpable. During the coffee break, I found myself near enough to catch fragments of their conversation. Amanda's voice was low but sharp, her words carrying the weight of frustration. "This isn't working, Daniel. You said things would get better." "They will," he snapped back, his tone curt. "I just need time." "Time," she scoffed. "We're running out of that, too." The exchange ended abruptly when they noticed me nearby. Amanda forced a smile, though her eyes betrayed the strain she was under. Daniel gave me a terse nod, his jaw tight. I didn't press. Their unraveling wasn't my concern, but it was hard to ignore how different they seemed from the polished, invincible couple they had once projected. Later that afternoon, I overheard more. This time, it was Amanda, speaking to a mutual acquaintance during a networking session. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice carried across the room, the bitterness in her tone unmistakable. "He's lost his touch," she said, her words clipped. "The deals aren't coming in like they used to, and the pressure it's suffocating. I've tried to help, but he won't listen." The acquaintance responded with polite murmurs, clearly uncomfortable, but Amanda didn't seem to notice or care. She was too wrapped up in her grievances, too consumed by whatever was eating away at her. Hearing this didn't bring me the satisfaction I might have expected. A decade ago, I might have reveled in their struggles, seen it as karmic justice for what they'd done to me. But now, it just felt hollow. Their problems were their own, and I had no interest in gloating. I'd moved past that. Still, the facade they'd so carefully maintained was crumbling, and it was impossible not to notice how it mirrored the very cracks they'd left in my life all those years ago. The difference was, I had rebuilt myself, turned those fractures into strength. They, it seemed, were still trying to hold their broken pieces together with the thinnest veneer of perfection. That evening, I crossed paths with Amanda again. She was standing alone on the terrace, a glass of wine in hand, her posture stiff. I debated whether to approach her but decided against it. Before I could leave, she turned and saw me. "Hi," she said, her voice softer than it had been earlier. "Hi," I replied, nodding politely. For a moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the view. Then, almost as if she couldn't stop herself, she spoke. "You've done well for yourself." "I have," I said simply. She nodded, taking a sip of her wine. "I used to think we made the right choice, Daniel and I. That I." Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. "But seeing you here, seeing the life you've built, it's clear we didn't just lose you. We lost ourselves, too." I didn't know what to say to that. The Amanda I remembered would never have admitted such a thing. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her choices. Hearing her speak now, with regret and vulnerability, was jarring. "I don't know what to tell you, Amanda," I said finally. "Life gives us what we put into it. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I'm grateful for where I am." She nodded, her expression pained. "You should be. You deserve it." With that, she walked away, leaving me alone on the terrace. I watched her retreating figure, wondering what had driven her to open up like that. Was it guilt, envy, or simply the weight of her own unhappiness? When I returned to my room that night, Evelyn was waiting for me, her warm smile a balm for the emotions swirling in my chest. As we sat together, I told her about the conversation with Amanda. She listened, her hand resting lightly on mine, her presence grounding me. "You don't owe them anything," she said softly. "Not an explanation, not forgiveness. You've moved on. Let them figure out their own path." She was right, of course. Daniel and Amanda's struggles weren't my burden to bear. I'd let them go years ago, and I wasn't about to let their unraveling pull me back into their orbit. That night, as I lay beside Evelyn, I felt a deep sense of peace. The cracks in their facade were their own to deal with. My life, my happiness, my success, they were mine, built on a foundation they could never touch. The final day of the retreat was dedicated to personal growth and reflection, with the keynote speech reserved for one of the participants. I'd been asked a week prior to deliver it, a request I'd initially hesitated to accept. Public speaking wasn't my favorite thing, but I knew this was more than just a speech. It was an opportunity to share the journey that had brought me here, not for validation, but to inspire others. As I stood backstage, I glanced at the audience filing into the grand hall. Industry leaders, innovators, and influencers, all gathered in anticipation. Among them were Daniel and Amanda, seated near the middle. Amanda's posture was tense, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel was quieter than I'd ever seen him, his usual confidence noticeably absent. I stepped onto the stage to a round of applause, the spotlight warm on my face. Taking a deep breath, I began. When I started my journey, I believed success was about reaching a destination. Wealth, status, recognition. I thought those things would make me whole, that they'd fill whatever voids life had created. But I was wrong. The room was silent, every eye on me. I could feel the weight of their attention, but instead of nerves, I felt a calm resolve. 10 years ago, I faced one of the greatest betrayals of my life. It broke me in ways I didn't think I could recover from. But that pain became my catalyst. It forced me to confront who I was and who I wanted to become. And in doing so, I discovered something far more valuable than success. I paused, scanning the room. Daniel shifted in his seat, his gaze fixed on me, while Amanda's expression was a mix of guilt and something I couldn't quite place. I discovered the value of integrity, of resilience, of surrounding myself with people who lift me up, rather than tear me down. The success I've built isn't just mine. It's a reflection of the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. It's a testament to the power of community, of trust, and of authenticity. The applause that followed was humbling, but I wasn't done. I raised a hand, signaling for silence. But this journey hasn't just been about professional growth. It's been about letting go of resentment, of anger, of the past. Because holding on to those things only holds you back. And I learned that real success isn't about what you achieve. It's about who you become along the way. As I finished, the room erupted in applause. I stepped back, letting the moment wash over me. When I returned to my seat, Evelyn squeezed my hand, her pride evident in her eyes. The rest of the day passed in a blur of conversations and connections. Attendees approached me, sharing their own stories of resilience and thanking me for my words. It was a reminder that even the smallest truths can have a profound impact. Later that evening, as the retreat drew to a close, I found myself face to face with Daniel and Amanda once more. They approached me hesitantly, their earlier confidence replaced by a tentative vulnerability. "That was," Daniel began, his voice trailing off. "That was powerful." Amanda nodded, her eyes glossy. "You've really grown. I didn't realize how much." I met their gazes, my expression calm but firm. Life has a way of teaching us what we need to know, whether we're ready for it or not. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his hands in his pockets. "I just wanted to say thank you. For the speech. For everything." Amanda's voice was softer. "And I'm sorry. For everything we put you through." For a moment, I considered their words. 10 years ago, I would have given anything to hear those apologies. But now, they felt like a footnote in a story that no longer revolved around them. "I appreciate that," I said simply. "But the past is the past. We all make choices, and we all live with them. What matters is what we do moving forward." They nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and regret. As they walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The anger, the resentment, the need for closure. It was all gone. In its place was a quiet peace, a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. That night, as Evelyn and I shared a quiet moment under the stars, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal that had once defined me was now just a chapter in a much larger story, one of resilience, growth, and the power of choosing to rise above the past. "You're quiet," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "Just thinking," I replied, my gaze on the horizon. "About how far we've come." She smiled, her hand finding mine. "And how far we'll go." I nodded, the future stretching out before us, limitless and full of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. As the retreat came to an end, there was a sense of finality in the air, a quiet understanding that this wasn't just the conclusion of an event, it was the closing of a chapter in my life. I watched as the attendees gathered their belongings, exchanged goodbyes, and promised to stay in touch. Among them were Daniel and Amanda, their presence a faint echo of what they had once been in my life. I noticed them standing by the exit, speaking in hushed tones. Amanda looked tired, her shoulders slumped under the weight of whatever burden she carried. Daniel's posture was stiff, his usual air of confidence replaced by something quieter, more subdued. For a moment, I wondered if they'd approach me again, but they didn't. Instead, they left quietly, their departure marked not by fanfare, but by a lingering sense of unfinished business. Evelyn and I stayed behind, savoring the last moments of the retreat. We wandered through the emptying halls, reflecting on the conversations and connections that had made the past few days so memorable. Evelyn's hand slipped into mine, her touch grounding me as it always did. "You handled everything beautifully," she said, her voice soft but full of pride. I smiled, glancing at her. "It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." She nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you feel lighter now?" I considered her question, letting the quiet settle around us. "Yes," I said finally. "I do." The truth was, seeing Daniel and Amanda again had forced me to confront parts of myself I thought I'd buried. Their betrayal had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I had built a life that was rich and meaningful, not in spite of them, but because I'd chosen to rise above what they'd done. Later that evening, as Evelyn and I sat on the balcony of our suite, overlooking the mountains, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the anger, the relentless drive to prove myself. It had all been part of the process. But now, I felt something different. Contentment, gratitude, a deep appreciation for the life I'd built and the woman who shared it with me. "You know," Evelyn said, breaking the comfortable silence, "it's funny how life works. 10 years ago, you probably couldn't have imagined this." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Not even close. And yet, here you are. Stronger, happier, whole." Her words hung in the air, a quiet affirmation of everything I'd come to realize. I looked at her, the woman who had been my anchor through every storm, and felt a surge of gratitude so profound it nearly overwhelmed me. "Thank you," I said, my voice low but steady. She tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "For what?" "For believing in me. For standing by me. For being you." Her smile widened, and she reached for my hand. "Always." As the stars emerged in the night sky, I thought about Daniel and Amanda. I didn't know what their future held, and for the first time, I realized I didn't need to. Their journey was theirs to navigate, just as mine was mine. Whatever resentment I had once harbored was gone, replaced by a quiet acceptance. They were part of my story, but they no longer held the pen. The retreat had been a reminder of many things, of how far I'd come, of the strength I'd found within myself, and of the importance of letting go. But most importantly, it had reminded me of the life I had built, a life grounded in authenticity, love, and resilience. As Evelyn and I turned in for the night, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The past was behind me, the future stretched out before me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free, and as I drifted to sleep, one thought remained clear. Life has a way of balancing the scales. Call it karma, call it fate, or simply call it the result of hard work and perseverance. Whatever it was, I knew this much: it was mine, and it was worth every step of the journey.